tells me what he thinks of me. He has done his job. And when the God who told the sun to rise tells me no to what I want, he is being God. He is being God. He is being God. He is being God. Heaven has no vacant thrones. You're not plugging your ears to our weeping. Heaven has no vacant thrones. When we're out of control, you're not losing your hold. That you are showing love. You are showing love. God who spoke me into life speaks about how I live mine. He can speak his mind. If the God who wipes away my sin wipes away the plans I've made, he is being kind. He is being kind. He is being kind. He is being kind. Heaven has no vacant. You're not plugging your ears to our weeping. Heaven has no vacant. When we're out of control, you're not
Had to be something.
losing.
Well, he'll help us do it.
Yeah.
I just forgot that we have to do it. Because we weren't going to start live meetings if he didn't think that anymore.
Right. Showing love.
No bad.
What the God gives and takes away gives me what he knows I need. He is being good. What the God gives and takes away the ones I love. He will still be good. 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 Heaven has no vacant thrones. You're not plugging your ears to our weeping. Heaven has no vacant thrones. When we're out of control, you're not losing your hold. But you are
Who's he bringing?
you are showing love.
Oh, then he needs to get his butt in here.
It won't all make me smile.
Thank you. Hey, Danny, I'm going to start at 3:37. I'm going to give it 1 more minute since John's not here.
And when it all falls apart,
So you guys will do one song, then you'll read that, and then you guys will do the other. You guys will do two. Then before the acapella, he's going to read his thing. Sweet.
And then it's gonna be
There's going to move right here.
but it's all for my good. And when it all falls apart,
Right.
you will always be good.
That's fine. He can do it. I trust him.
Plugging your ears to our weeping. Heaven has
give it.
no vacant thrones. When we're out of control, you're not losing your hold. Heaven has no vacant thrones. You're not plugging your ears to our weeping. Heaven has no vacant thrones. When we're out of control, you're not losing your hold. You are showing love. You are showing love.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Woven this week. Just going to get started with a few announcements. Next week, Michelle Roller will be sharing. She'll be here and we'll be sharing. And then the week after, the Beaumont Choir will be singing and Derek will be sharing. So that's coming up there. And then on 3-3 for all of the Asbury people, Kevin Ballou will be here. So, so just some exciting things coming there. After service today, there's a Super Bowl party at my house. So if you are interested in interested in coming, please see me. and I can get you my address. We also decided to extend D&D, so that will be tomorrow night. Be here at 6. It'll start at 6:30. And then also tomorrow, John, if D&D is not your thing, you can go to a book study with John. It's on this book, The Sin of Certainty by Peter Enns. So you have a couple options there. And then next door on March 1st, we'll be doing a streaming of the new Color Purple movie. So stay tuned for that. Take it away, Derek.
Hello. So, I haven't sang in probably a couple of months because of the back and all of that stuff. So if you hear a bunch of just pretend that I'm that guy from, Neon Trees, when he's like, hey, baby, won't you come my way? So it's part of the song. Just think of it that way.
We rehearsed it that way.
We did rehearse it that way, yes. We're going to be doing some songs that are specifically with Black History Month. These are all songs that were either written or attributed to people from Black history, and a couple from that are a little bit more modern, because I think one of the habits that we get into as white people and the system of white people is that we like to celebrate the old stuff. Like, Black history is cool. Black people from the 60s are cool. They did some cool stuff, but then we don't really actually celebrate the people now. So there's a couple songs from back then, a couple songs from now. So yeah, we've done a couple of these before. So if you know them, do sing along. And if not, enjoy. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, and gonna study war no more. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, and gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna lay down that atom bomb down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my atom bomb down by the riverside, and gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna put on my long white robe down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna put on my long white robe down by the riverside, and gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more.
If I'm remembering right, this was last Sunday that we did the big reading, right? Okay. Time is a concept I fight every single day. And with that being said, we're returning back to the good Black Liturgy's book of prayer, poems, and meditations for staying human. And today I'll be reading a section of 3 quotes and a prayer for Good Friday. And at the end, there's going to be another little section of the inhale, exhale. I'm going to do it twice. So I'll read both parts, the inhale and the exhale. Feel free to breathe with me. And then the second time that I do it, if you would like to, you're more than welcome to say the exhale part with me as you exhale. So that's a heads up. With the logistics out of the way, here it goes. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Isaiah 53, 8-9. Until we can see the cross and the lynching tree together, until we can identify Christ with a recrucified black body hanging from a lynching tree, there can be no genuine understanding of Christian identity in America, and no deliverance from the brutal legacy of slavery and white supremacy. James H. Cone. The cross can heal and hurt. It can be empowering and liberating, but also enslaving and oppressive. I believe that the cross placed alongside the lynching tree can help us to see Jesus in America in a new light, and thereby empower people who claim to follow him to take a stand against white supremacy and every kind of injustice. James H. Cone. God of the long night, thank you for being a God not just of solidarity, but of deep and raw emotion. A God who did not endure violence in silence, but who spoke and cried as your body was broken on the cross. Help us to understand that our memory of you becomes more whole when we remember you alongside the injustices with which you suffered in solidarity, the hunger, the abuse, the loneliness of the world. Today, let us grieve the path of the cross, illness, violence, alienation, the degradation of land, and all pain unspoken. Let us weep and rest. Reveal yourself to us. Remind us of a God who knows the weight of oppression, and help us believe that truly you are with us, that your cause is our cause, no less than justice and liberation in life and death. Amen. Now breathe. Inhale. This is too much to hold. Exhale. I can grieve with God. Inhale. This is too much to hold. Exhale. I can grieve with God.
Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto the Ancient of Days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the Ancient of Days. Every tongue in heaven and earth can declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne. In worship you will be exalted, O God. And your kingdom shall not pass away, O Ancient of Days. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto the Ancient of Days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the Ancient of Days. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee will bow at your throne. In worship you will be exalted, O God. And your kingdom shall not pass away, O Ancient of Days. Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. For none can compare to your matchless worth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. Every knee in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne. In worship you will be exalted, O God. And your kingdom shall not pass away, O Ancient of Days. Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. For none can compare to your matchless worth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. For none can compare to your matchless worth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. You are Alpha and Omega. We worship you, our Lord. You are worthy to be excerpt from the book that we're going to be looking at today, from The Cross and the Lynching Tree. It says, "During my childhood, I heard a lot about the cross at Macedonia AME Church, where faith in Jesus was defined and celebrated. We sang about Calvary and we asked, 'Were you there?' Down at the cross when they crucified my Lord. Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble." The spirituals, gospel songs, and hymns focused on how Jesus achieved salvation for the least through his solidarity with them, even unto death. There were more songs, sermons, prayers, and testimonies about the cross than any other theme. The cross was the foundation on which their faith was built. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? And were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when God raised him from the tomb? Were you there when God raised him from the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when God raised him from the tomb? And Lord Jesus, we thank you that in solidarity, not out of some kind of sadistic plan, you died for us. You died with us. And Lord, we thank you for the testimony of our black siblings that have come before, that are with us now, and that will come after, that know that solidarity so deeply. And we thank you for this book and the man who wrote it, with the heaviness of it that all of us here in this room need to wrestle with. Lord, I pray that you be with us. I pray that you be with Matt and John as they talk about it, and that you would help us to see you just a little bit deeper because of the people who see you so deeply, that we would look to them and know that you're good, and that good can only mean good. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Danny. It's sort of a solemn day, you know, and it's okay. Some days church is lighthearted and fun, and sometimes it's hard. And we want to do both. We want to do a whole spectrum of the emotions. One of the beautiful things about our God is that we believe this God is in tune with us, and can be in tune with you in a hard place and in tune with somebody else in a happy place. The beauty of being omnipotent is that you can do that kind of thing, and that's great. So this is Matt Harling. He's on our team, on our leadership team, and I'm John Roller, for any of those that don't know me. I'm so glad to be here with you today. So today we are doing this book by James Cone called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. We're going to talk through it some. Just as way of introduction, several of the things that Danny read were by James Cone that wrote this book. He was born in 1938, died just a few years ago, in 2018, and this was written in 2011 after many other books. He's really the preeminent black theologian of America's history. Was a professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Some of you would know the name Niebuhr, Heinbolt Niebuhr, and he took, it was like 10 years after Niebuhr left, but was in that position at Union after Niebuhr, and he talks a lot about Niebuhr in this book. So, just with that as an introduction, he refers throughout the book to this song that Derek alluded to too. It was made famous by Billie Holiday and called "Strange Fruit." And so I'm just going to read it for you, the poem. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. And just to, I guess, to give that as the backdrop of this idea of the cross and the lynching tree. And I don't know. I don't know why I had never seen that before, that those are the same idea, the cross and the lynching tree. You know, when it says in 1 Corinthians, and they hung him on a tree. Of course, it's talking about the cross. And just the similarities of, in lynching, most often it's been an innocent person. And so here's an innocent person being crucified. And the jeering crowd. And the symbolism of both was just, it's so striking that I had never seen it before. I don't know how I missed it.
Yeah, it's not one I had thought of before either, and I was just thinking about this as we were sitting here, that we're starting this discussion about the cross the same week that Lent occurs, which is of course leading up to Easter Sunday. So I thought that was kind of poignant too.
Boy, that's perfect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the way to the cross, and it's probably good for us here at the beginning of Lent, officially starting Wednesday.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah. What do you want to give up for Valentine's Day? Yeah. Yeah. The symbolism that also Derek was talking about, that we really believe this idea of Christ with us, and especially for the Black American, Cone talks a lot about this idea of that they really gravitate to the cross, because the cross is not only the death, but it's also the hope of what can come out of suffering. So not that suffering needs to happen, but when it does happen, that it can have this different kind of fruit than the kind of fruit that the song was. For us, in our own ways, to be able to identify with Jesus, I think is really is essential, and it's what Jesus' idea was to identify with us so that we could identify with him. And so he goes with us into death, and we will go with him in resurrection. And as a church, we affirm that idea. You're welcome to believe whatever you want, and you don't lose any ground here with whatever you believe. You don't have to believe any of it. And but as a church, that's what we would say, that we believe that Christ became us so that we could become actually like him. And that's a pretty beautiful thing. And so for Black Americans to have the cross in the midst of lynching, that's the big hope, is that it's not the end. So, Matt, why don't you give us a sort of an overview, and also just talk us sort of through each chapters what he talks about.
Yeah, sure. So, I find this interesting that this came out in 2011, because you might think, lynching, that was several years ago. That can't still possibly, be a discussion. We can discuss it from a historical point, but how is that, still happening today? And I think lynching presents itself obviously in a very different way today. I think it's still, it's kind of what he kind of points out is that it's kind of the starting point of historical racism, and that has pervaded our sort of whole like faith in society through even now, and it just presents itself differently, even though we don't see lynchings as often as it occurred during the lynching eras. So what he kind of goes through with this book is the first chapter is kind of like an overview of sort of Black history and sort of the history of the lynching era, let me pull up those dates here. He says it was 1880 to 1940 was the most popular, or what he kind of defined as the lynching era. So he kind of gives a history of that, of Black people and what they kind of had to go through during that era to survive. How they had to exist. He also calls out that nearly 5,000 African Americans were victims of lynching during this time, which is an incredible stat in not a great way. A lot of them unnamed, unrecognizable after the crime that had been committed against them. And that's a very important way to start off this book, to be like, here's the history, here's where it all kind of started from.
And just to put that in context, so just for a history point of view, right? Of course, Africans were enslaved from the 1600s and through the Civil War. And then in 1865, the North wins the Civil War, and Black people are all free. And the government institutes Reconstruction. And this is a way to empower African Americans in both the vote and in, by the way, if you've been hearing a lot about the 14th Amendment, that's from this era, the Reconstruction era. And Reconstruction only lasted a few years because, unfortunately, the government didn't hold to what it wanted to do in the 14th Amendment, what it originally wanted to do. And the South, the white, won back power. And with it, they took all of the Reconstruction era laws and got rid of them. And this is what you would know as the Jim Crow era. So basically 1880 to 1940, really the lynching era was this. Then you hear of Jim Crow laws a lot today. If you go to Jessamine County and you go to the courthouse, you will see a Confederate statue to a Confederate soldier still today in Jessamine County at our courthouse. And the tree, fortunately, is no longer there, but there was a tree just beside it where a man was lynched in the early 1900s. And this was after the Confederate soldier had been put up, and there was a lynching there. And for any of you connected to Asbury, Asbury didn't do anything. There was no response. But the next week they sent pastors to Nicholasville to preach against drinking. So just as a little context, and that represents really the American church, the white church. And so I just wanted to mention that just for the historical context.
Yeah, for sure. And I think all of this kind of leads to kind of a presentation of, what, lynching was, and kind of comparing it to the cross of Jesus, and how that, kind of how we've said multiple times now already, is just the suffering Christ was so relevant to those suffering. So it kind of gives an overview of that suffering and how that connection was made. And then from there, he talks about Reinhold Niebuhr. Okay. Wanted to make sure I got that right. And Reinhold was one who was he was a very popular theologian at the time. Brought up a lot of discussions about the cross. That was kind of like his main thing. And yet somehow still couldn't connect the dots between the suffering Christ and the racist suffering of those who were victims of lynching. And James calls him out on it and says, like, you saw this. You saw all this stuff happening. It's not like you weren't aware. He comments here, among white theologians, he was particularly sensitive to the evils of racism, and spoke and wrote on many occasions of the sufferings of African Americans. Few theologians of the 20th century focused as much attention on the cross, one of the central themes of his work, and yet even he failed to connect the cross in its most vivid reenactment in his time.
And part of what struck me was, so this is the liberal church in America. When I was growing up as an evangelical, Niebuhr was the enemy. He was the bad guy because he was the liberal Christian. And so now I am the enemy, and I am the progressive liberal Christian. So I've become my own grandfather. It's not quite that, but it's yeah. And so it would have been easy for me to condemn, sort of this is before there was evangelicalism, but to condemn the roots of evangelical church as not caring about this. But it's my people now, too. The liberals weren't doing it either. In fact, in the white church as a whole, there really was no voice against the evils of lynching, which is crazy to my mind. I mean, there were abolitionists at the Civil War time, lots of them in lots of churches. And yet, by the time we get to this era, there's really no voice from the white church in America. And so I blame all around. None of us got it. None of us went there. None of us saw it. And it's unconscionable, and I grieve for my own past, for my own heritage. In the 60s, when there was all the racial unrest, I was clueless. No idea that there was anything in all the white churches I was a part of, also clueless, by the way. The two churches that were doing good work were the Friends and the Unitarian Church. The Unitarians were really on the front line of these racial justice. Just interesting note.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part now is like being able to reflect on that. You're able to then have your eyes more open today and pass that on to others.
And we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah. Just to kind of like preface that piece of like how important it is to make sure that we are staying aware of this today, and how, like I said before, lynchings just have changed. It still happens. It just looks a little bit different these days. And he points out another part too, where even later he had written his first work and sent it to Niebuhr to be able to be like, hey, check this work out and provide your thoughts. And he provided various, thoughts on the theological piece, but Niebuhr was still so focused on like, he said, well, one of his comments was, well, look at, there is a black senator now. Like, why aren't you reflecting on that? Why aren't you saying, no, look at the progress we made? And he's like, what? What? One senator, like that's supposed to make a difference. Like that's supposed to reconcile the years of enslavement and lynching and racism. So Niebuhr just never really saw it throughout his whole entire life. And I'm glad that's called out so that we have the chance to rectify that in our own lives. And from there, he talks about Niebuhr was actually good friends with Martin Luther King Jr. And he kind of goes into Martin Luther King's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Pacifist sort of way of like...
Yeah, nonviolent resistance.
Nonviolent resistance and how important that is as a way to fight it. Fight lynchings, fight racism. I think I pulled a piece of that. Hold on. King would call out before a demonstration. What do you want? And the demonstrators would say freedom, which they would shout back, ready to face angry white mobs and policemen. When do you want it? King would ask, his voice reaching a crescendo. Now, was the resounding response as the protesters would begin walking and singing together, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now, was the persistent cry for freedom among people who had never known it. And that was very, like, I think different for the time, finally having somebody who was able to speak activism in a nonviolent way that I think white people in their very active way to be terrible didn't know how to respond.
I'd be interested in hearing from any of you at some point, just your thoughts on, King as opposed to Malcolm X. And isn't there a movie coming out?
Yeah, it's a
whole show.
Yeah, they've been putting out a couple episodes. I haven't watched it yet. I always think it's interesting that when it comes to black activism during this time, they still try to pit two ideologies against each other.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much it was like, but who really, like...
Well, and just to that point, so he talks about it, he has a book about how he feels like they're both on the same side.
Yeah.
And he has an earlier book, Cone does, on that. And I would like to point out that nobody says that the American Revolution should have been nonviolent resistance. Like, it's never come up that I know of. Certainly in Israel, no one has said they should have done nonviolent resistance. That's not been a thing. And yet, I'm so impressed with MLK because he went down this road, which I think is the road of Jesus. And at the same time, how can we say with Malcolm X, this is another side of justice and something that's very important. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, no, I think we very actively have to think both can be true. There is a time for nonviolence, and there is a time where the message is not being heard, and sometimes there may be actions that need to be taken care of, like done, to show what people are missing. I remember, I'm going to try and remember all the pieces of it, but I remember during some of the Minneapolis riots after, I think it was George Floyd's death, like there was a Target that was burned down, and people were asking the person, like, what do you think about the Target burning down? And the black person was like, that Target isn't a black-owned business. It doesn't belong here. It's kind of invaded into our culture and our neighborhood that we've created and that we've been, bringing from the ground up. So I think that's in some ways where that sort of that type of activism can send a message to be like, Target's going to survive. One business can burn down and Target will be fine. But it sends that message of, these are our communities and you are killing our children. So from there, he goes on into the next chapter to talk a lot about black artists during the time, black poets, and some of the different ways that they portrayed the suffering Christ, along with black lynching and black lives being important. And one of the poems that he shares is a black poet who was just kind of done. He had tried to, write this poetry that was like representing Christ and everything, but he just had seen enough. So I was going to share that poem here. If I can get to it. Sorry, I'm trying to find it.
Even as he's finding that, the art is one of the themes of the book is that black people have been able to use art, and specifically music and poetry and the blues, to be a way of resistance. Since they weren't allowed to do overt resistance, they did resistance through art. And this is a striking poem, and it's hard to hear, but see if you can hear it in the way I think that it was intended.
Yeah, let me find the author. Where's his first name? His last name is Hughes. I don't think it was Langston Hughes.
I think it was.
Was it?
Langston Hughes, I think that's
Okay.
right.
That probably sounds right. This poem is called Goodbye, Christ. Listen, Christ, you did all right in your day, I reckon, but that day's gone now. They ghosted you up a swell story, too. Called it Bible, but it's dead now. The popes and the preachers made too much money from it. They've sold you to many. Kings, generals, robbers, and killers, even to the Tsar and the Cossacks, even to Rockefeller's church, even to the Saturday Evening Post. You ain't no good no more. They've pawned you till you've done worn out. So yeah, it's a very heavy condemnation of the kind of capitalism selling of Christ, where they've once again really missed the message of the sacrificial Christ that the black community has a much better understanding of.
One of the questions we've asked at Woven is the church too broke to fix? And, so that poem is this idea of it's just too broke. Let's start over. And we're still working on the assumption that the way that the church has lived is not the way of Christ. and that the way of Christ is worth saving, that it is valuable, that intimacy with God, like that we don't want all of that was so present, that's been so present in the white church in America. We don't want all of that to win the day. Like, I want us to have resistance against that. To say, no, that's not Christ. And the way that of Christ is actually of beauty. And the black church would say that too. The way of Christ, they would, even if they would say they're fed up with white Jesus, so are we. But this way is worth saving, we think. And we're going down that road.
Yeah. So from there, he continues this idea of art and goes into the song we discussed earlier to discuss black women and how important they were during this time. A major person he talks about is Ida B. Wells and her influence among those who were suffering. And he talks about, I wanted to kind of cover this piece too, where he talks about a lot of males would be like, I'm just going to run away. I'm just going to escape this because it's just death every day. He says, but for black women, however, running away was not an easy option. It was difficult for them to leave their children. They had to think about more than trying to secure their own safety. Thus, they often stayed where they were and made the most of a bad situation, trying to survive with dignity as they wrestled with limited resources against the virulent expressions of racial hatred.
Yeah. There are several places we want to go eventually. Of course, racism against Black America, what we've done to Native Americans, and how we've treated women. And all three of those are really important ways that we want to say the way of Jesus is different than it's been presented. And go down those roads. Just to finish up, give us a sense of, you mentioned, it's still happening in a different way today. What does that look like today? And what are we going to do as a church to not be in that spot that the church was in the 60s, where they're like, yeah, I don't know about that MLK guy. He was a womanizer and he was a communist, and and they went down those paths. I mean, I remember that from my childhood. How can we not go down those roads, but actually address racism?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways. I also bought this book, The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby, who's another great African-American writer who discusses a lot about racism. He even has a book, How to Fight Racism, that's the follow-up to this. But the end of this book gives a whole lot of different ways to fight. So like watching documentaries about racial history, diversifying your social media feed, websites, podcasts, all of those things. And I think the most important thing is to just keep ourselves aware of what is going on. It's hard not to in the social media age to be unaware, but the deep levels of systemic racism in our country, I think there's a lot of hidden ways that the government continues to put people down, whether it's redlining, kind of shepherding all of the black people to be in the same part of the city together, and then causing noise pollution as well. There was this podcast that I was listening to, 20,000 Hertz, where they mention how a lot of cities have this loud noise pollution, and that's also where a lot of people of different races live, because that's where they can find work, and they are actively the victims of noise pollution and the anxiety that can cause and lead to. Obviously, our prison system has been horribly set up to hurt those of color, between prison system itself and the policing system as well. Has a lot of inherent racism within it that is not obvious to the naked eye. And it's important to stand with those who are suffering.
And specifically, I want us to politically care about prison reform and about reform of the whole penal code, which is just so disenfranchising to specifically to black males, but to blacks in general. We as a church, it's okay for us to be politically active and to care about immigrants, to care about people on our southern border, to their humanity and their value. We're supposed to care about that. And so we don't know how to do all of this legally, but we do want to care politically because it's our only avenue in a lot of instances for really treating some of these things.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know where you can fight, because you're not going to always have political influence. You're not always going to be able to stretch yourself, or maybe, you might not always be able to go to a protest march.
I can't wait till we march as a church.
Yeah, that'll be great.
I'm so eager for that day, for Beaumont and you all, for us to be in Lexington streets together. That's going to be a good day.
Yeah, that'll be a great day, and I want us to, be a part of that, and I think it is important. But I also want people to recognize, there are many different ways to fight against racism, and some of it may be even stuff that you have to fight internally. When we talked about bias, I think last year, some of those internal biases that we may have, that may be where you have to start with that whole kind of overcoming racism within the things that you've been taught and the things that you've taken in yourself. There are many different ways to fight against that, and it's important that we find those ways to make sure that we are standing up and standing with the vulnerable.
Speaking of which, we're going to come to the table together. This is to the cross. And so you can just make your way back and get a cracker and some juice. And then together we'll take this in commemoration of the cross, but also of the lynching tree. this next week, Tawana and I are headed to Alabama, and on the way back, we're going to the lynching museum. And if you've seen any of those pictures, they're just they're beyond horrible. And to remember that is also Christ. That it's the lynched person and it's Christ. And in solidarity, Jesus invites us to take this, to say, we do this with you. We suffer. We want to identify with the injustice of it. And it's beautiful that Jesus would invite us to do that. And so now we do it here together. In the blood of Black Americans, in the blood of Jesus, Jesus did this for them, and Jesus did this for us.